balancing Mildred's outgoing personality and Gus's more subdued personality. They were, however, captivating raconteurs, each in their own way. As a child, Dad stuttered, and because he stuttered, he stopped his stuttering, but he spoke in a very slow and reflective manner when he was talking to you, like explaining something, and with deep philosophical thought, whether he was explaining the imagery of a painting or a book he was reviewing or a great meal he had. He had a dry sense of humor and would indulge us with a story that went on forever about an experience he had for it only to be fiction. Mildred, on the other hand, told off-color jokes, which my father didn't tell, was outgoing with a beautiful smile and hospitable personality, and was the consummate saleswoman, especially when it came to selling my father's art. Now, my mother was an artist in her own right. My father was an artist with a paintbrush and paint. My mother was a food artist. She would design a salad that you think wasn't real. It was absolutely magnificent. Nobody wanted to start it because she did do designing, and not only her salads, but most of her food. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of it. She was also a humorist, and English became her primary language, even though she still spoke and wrote Yiddish and Polish and Ukrainian. She wrote a poem in rhyme that was presented by a women's group upstate New York, and again, a women's group in Long Island, New York. Here we go on to serious stuff. This is important to understand what my father also believed and thought and what inspired him. I identify with the host of thinkers who taught the Maya veil of existence, that all is illusion. The world is transformed by the mind, and so it is in life. We each create our own mythology. Now, Maya is the Sanskrit for illusion. And if you look it up, it also has many meanings in Indian philosophies. So the nature of Maya and the world we live in, my father painted and thought and wrote and believed that it's your own creation, what's within you, which was important. Another important aspect of his art was swans. Now, Leda in the Swan symbolizes beauty and purity. Of course, they're white. And Leda in the Swan is a very famous mythology story. Zeus was a powerful god, and he was in love with the mortal woman Leda. So he disguised himself as a swan and seduced her. And some of the stories say she had laid 2 eggs. I don't know how long after, but she laid 2 eggs, which ended up being Zeus's god and goddess children. Dad was always interested in mythology, and here he was ahead of his time as well, or behind the times, because Leda and the Swan was painted by the greatest artist. I just happened to have this one, which was a copy of Michelangelo's Leda and the Swan. I think it's a little more sensual, I don't know, where you see the swan there. And here is Lake Goddess, one of my father's favorites. This is really something, we have it hanging in our home, our new home in Wellington here. My father did write about the meaning and reflections behind Lake Goddess, which I'm going to read to you. In her beauty and strength of destiny also is the illusion, for she is protectress of a fathomless domain. Her reign is the countless lakes of the world, wherein innocence is wonderment, but the pain is real. I'll leave that there for a minute. I did have a little water here for a second. So as you see, Dad did this when he started painting again at age 60, not one of his original ones. And here he started his spiritual paintings. We have Buddha and the Eightfold Path. Now this was done in the mid-70s, and it transmitted the experience of Gus's bond with this guy, Swami Muktananda Paramahasama. Now, the Swami was traveling the country and happened to land in the Catskills and have an ashram, but I'll tell you why. In the 70s, the hotels were closing down. They were empty. They wanted to be sold. They wanted to be rented. So Baba Muktananda, we called him Baba, and his followers were able to stay in a place that was too close to our home, actually, about 2 miles down the road. And sometime in the mid-70s, my father, being curious, went and said hi to the Swami and became an intimate of his inner circle. Now, this is, a side story, but it has to do with his art. Dad thought it'd be wonderful if his younger family, Bruce and myself, my son Spencer was about 11 there, and Ava, you were about 8 or younger, something like that, made pilgrimage to the ashram for lunch and for prayer and for a feather. So here, this isn't exactly it. That guy doesn't move. But we were Dad's guests at the ashram. And lunch was boiled grass. I even remember it to this day. And then we and all his followers went into a very large room where we sat cross-legged and we chanted Hare Krishna. It was like the musical Hair in real life. After that, everybody stood up. There had to be 75 people in line that day or more, and in a row. So we were greeted by the Baba, who was sitting on a platform. And as we walked up, and everyone walked up, he hit us in the head with a 4-foot peacock feather. Now, that was our only transcendental experience. There was none ever after that. Also, during the spiritual years, my father painted Jesus the Jew. You could see Jesus carrying the cross, and behind him, the split Star of David. Do you see that there? And Dad was inspired by his Jewish heritage and passion for theological studies. He was born with a thirst for knowledge. Nothing to Gus was mundane or commonplace. He found all aspects of life fascinating. He was a student of the classics, theology, mythology, and philosophy. It all guided his work and his heart. And when he resumed his paintings with new dimensions, he was very excited about his spiritual paintings as well. At the end of his life, I think I'll say this now, Dad had read and reviewed a voluminous amount of classics. He wrote hundreds of essays for journals and newspapers, and was the editor of an international poetry magazine. He was passionate about art, religion, and especially a good Chinese meal. Loved it. And here, later in the Deco period, that was a resurgence period, Dad did his classic decos again. So we have here Deco Lore, Deco Vintage, and La Mode, which they were sold sometimes together and sometimes individually. Now, I'm showing you this picture not to show you how disheveled Dad looked, but this was how he worked. He always had like a plaid jacket. In the winter, he had a same sweater, button front, glasses, but in the background, we have a painting that he had just completed, Spiritus. Now, my mother didn't pose for any of the nudes, but she did pose for Spiritus. And he needed her, yes, he said he needed her profile, so she sat for him with Spiritus. We have here a painting that was inspired by my parents' very dear friend and customer who had cancer and had a mastectomy, breast cancer, and had a mastectomy. And my father felt he owed her a gift, and he wanted a gift not only for her, but women who were going through the same health issues. And that's why he called it Love Call. Teardrop was commissioned. There was a young man, customer, whose mother passed away. And he came to the gallery and asked my father if he could please paint a picture for him in memory of his mother. And this is what Dad did. Now, Dad would vacillate between something deco and then something in the future, and his birds and his swans, and you'd never know what it would be. You know, the artist mentality. But he did return to his paintings that he was more excited about and enthused about his abstracts than almost anything he had done in the years prior.